For those of you that don't know me, my name's Tom, and today we're going to be taking a look at John the Baptist. So, John appears in the Gospel of Mark only for a short period of time, but from this short passage, we can gain so much about his life. There are three incredible things that we see John do in this passage, and I want to look at those. The first thing that John does is that he baptizes people. I know, crazy. John the Baptist baptized people. Wow. But one of those people that John baptizes is Jesus. Let me say that again. That's something we take for granted. John the Baptist got to baptize Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. He was the one chosen for that. John also fulfilled prophecy. John, in Malachi and Isaiah, they prophesy about one who comes before Jesus to prepare the way. They talk about him going out and preparing the way for the Messiah. And John, out of millions of people that could have done this, was the one that was chosen to fulfill this. The third thing that John did is that he preached. Not only did he preach, though, but when he preached, he had thousands of people coming to follow him. Imagine that. You're preaching, and thousands of people are coming to listen to what you have to say. The text says that all the people from the Judean countryside and all of Jerusalem come to follow him. And I tried to find a number for how many people that would be. I found numbers ranging anywhere from 40,000 people to 250,000 people. You know, whatever number that is, let's take the low end of it, of 40,000. And that might not, when it says all of the people, it might not mean every single person, you know. But it's still a good majority of them. If you take a portion of 40,000, you're still looking at a number in the thousands of people that are coming to listen to John speak, to hear what he has to say, and to come and follow him. I don't know if you've ever had somebody look up to you, but if you have, it's an incredible experience. You get to say stuff and see somebody listen to it, take it in, be receptive to what you're saying, and see it impact their life. Imagine having thousands of people look up to you and listen to what you're saying. I think it would be really hard to be in that situation and to not let that get to your head. I think it's really hard to remain humble in a situation where thousands of people are looking at you and listening to what you have to say. Somehow, John remains humble and does this through the hard times. You know, sometimes I struggle with humility when I do one little thing right. John does three huge things right, and he's still humble in all of it. And I think that's something important to take note of. Instead of pointing to himself and saying, look at all these incredible things that I did, he points to Jesus and he says, I'm not even worthy to stoop down and untie his sandals. And that's incredible. So let's look at who this John guy was. So when you're describing somebody, what are you going to say about them? You're going to talk about things that distinguish them from other people. You're going to talk about the specific things that differentiate them. So if you're describing me, for instance, you might say I'm really tall, have glasses, and run way too much. You probably aren't going to look at me and say, he wears jeans, enjoys pizza, and has a face. Those just aren't things. You know, when somebody says that, I'm not like, oh, that's Tom. He's the one with the face. So when Mark's talking about John, he's talking about these things that differentiate him. He's talking about when John says that he comes from the wilderness, he eats wild honey and locusts, and he wears clothing made from camel skin. Those aren't things that are normal. Those aren't normal for the time. John is somebody who stands out, who is probably a bit of an outcast. Some people probably looked at him and thought he was crazy. In today's society, I don't think John was the homecoming king. I don't think John was the star of this football team. He was a crazy guy that God chose to use in crazy ways. And I think that God wants to use each one of us in incredible ways as well. As Christians, we should want this to happen in our lives. How cool would it be to be the person that got to baptize Jesus, that got to have thousands of people listening to what you're doing and saying, to get to fulfill prophecy from thousands of years ago? I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty awesome. I think there's two main things that in our lives we let get in our way of doing this. I think they are feeling inadequate and also fear. So let's start with feeling inadequate. For some reason, a lot of people in this room don't feel like we should be used by God. We feel like we don't deserve to be used by God. We have some reason in our lives where we say, we're not good enough. We look around the earth and see 7 billion people. Why would God choose me out of all those people? Each one of us has different skills and talents. You're gifted with different things that nobody else in the entire world has. And God has given you those for a reason. He wants to use your life in incredible ways. Even with that, though, we still sometimes feel inadequate. For me, I was cut from my basketball team in 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. Year after year. Kept going back, kept getting cut. Funny enough, the coach came back and asked me in 12th grade when I got really tall to come play for the team. But that's a different story. During that time, though, after getting cut year after year, it starts to take a toll on you. You start to feel that you're not good enough. You start to ask yourself, what's wrong with me? And you start to let those feelings of inadequacy take control of your life. Instead of focusing on God, I started focusing on that, and I let that consume my entire life. I got down on myself a lot and just was not happy. For each of us, we have our own different reasons. We all have a different reason or an excuse as to why God can't use us. Some of us might say we're not popular enough for God to use, but God has used somebody less popular than you. We might say our actions aren't good enough, but God has used somebody who messed up more than you. We might say that we're not talented enough, or not good enough at speaking, but God has used somebody less elegant than you. And some of us, we might say that we're too crazy to be used by God, but God used John. These excuses look different in all of our lives, but that's all they are. They're excuses. They aren't real reasons why we can't be used by God. We put up barriers as to why I can't do it. Because honestly, most of us probably don't want to be used by God. There's something that we have to give up in order to live that lifestyle, in order to change our lives to completely follow God. And sometimes those sacrifices don't look like they're worth making. God has used somebody that has been in a similar situation as you and has made similar excuses to you. The second thing I want to talk about is fear. Fear holds us back a lot as Christians. There are two different types of fear that I want to look at. The first is the standard, the fear of rejection. We're afraid that when we go and talk to somebody or when we go live out our faith, that people are going to reject us, that they're going to look at us weird, that they might ignore what we have to say, or even worse, they might make fun of what we have to say. But as Christians, we have to take a step in our life to be disciples of Jesus Christ and step out in faith, to step past that comfort zone and to step out in faith and live like Christ. The second fear that we have is the fear of people listening. I know that doesn't sound like a standard fear. It's the opposite of the fear of rejection. If we talk to somebody about our faith, they might listen to us. And that sounds great. That's what we want, right? But let me explain that. So what if I try to talk to somebody about my faith and they actually listen to me this time? That would be weird, right? What if I get through to them? What if they ask a question that I don't know the answer to? What if I don't know what to say? I thought I needed to have every answer to every question before I could start living out my faith, because I didn't want to be in that situation where I didn't know. The truth is, we're never going to get to a point where we have every answer to every question. No matter how much you read the Bible, how long you follow God, you're never going to get to that point. And we need to step out in faith in order to live our full potential. Even deeper in this fear is that if they listen, they might look at my life and they might see the way that I'm living and say, that doesn't line up with what you're saying. I think we fear that if somebody listens to me, they might take it deeper and they might listen to what my actions are saying. If we want to impact others, we first need to take a look at our own lives and see how those are following Christ. If you want to tell somebody else to follow Christ, you better first be following him. Now, I'm not saying we have to be perfect. That's not what God calls for. But we need to be practicing what we're preaching. All of these things that I've talked about can be summarized into us not caring enough. We say we want to be used by God, but we don't act like it. You know, it would be great to be like John. It would be great to baptize Jesus. It would be great to have thousands of people following me and to fulfill prophecy. But it takes a lot to do that. It would require a lot of sacrifices. It might mean standing in a river for hours, baptizing people that just keep coming and coming and coming when I want to go home and take a nap. It might require stepping outside of my comfort zone. It might require being nice to that person that you don't like. It might require not watching Netflix for days on end. It might require some rejection. It might require spending more time with God. It probably would mean making God the #1 priority in my life. It would require an entire lifestyle change. The question is, how badly do you want God to use your life? We can all say it on a surface level that we want to be used by God, but are we living like it? Are we taking those steps in faith to actually allow God to use our lives? Is it worth the sacrifices we have to make? Being a Christian's hard, but God promises that it's worth it, and we need to start by following him. Before we're going to step out in faith and tell others to follow him, we need to make sure we're following him ourselves. Each one of us have people in our lives that are thirsting for just a taste of that righteousness. They're thirsting for something more, and we can be the person that God can use to share that with them. The question comes down to if we're going to step out in faith. Or are we going to continue to make the same excuses? Are we going to continue to say that God can't use me because of this? Well, guess what? God used John. God used Moses. If you want to take a look at somebody making excuses and God using them anyway, look at Exodus and look at the story of Moses. He makes excuse after excuse after excuse. And God still says, I want to use you. And God wants to use each one of us as long as we're willing to take that step in faith. God used a crazy guy to baptize Jesus, to fulfill prophecy, and to have thousands of followers. He wants to use you as well. When you look at that excuse in your life that's holding you back, remember, God has used crazier people than you.